Well, hey, Redeemer Bible Church, our book of the month this month is called Hope in the Mourning. And I wanted to have a conversation with the compiler of all of the stories that you'll find in this book, Miss Emily Curtis, and you can watch us on this episode of the Redeeming Truth podcast. Well, hey, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Redeeming Truth podcast. My name is Kyle. I get to be one of the pastors here at Redeemer. And in this episode, we're going to be featuring the Redeemer Bible Church Book of the Month. And so I have it here. It is called Hope in the Mourning, a hope-filled guide through grief. And I'm going to be joined today by the author and the compiler of this resource named Emily Curtis. And Emily, it's so good to have you with us here today. Just a little bit of background. Emily and I have known each other for many years. We went to college together at the Master's College. Before it was the Master's University, we're old school like that. And it's such an encouragement to have a friend and a former colleague in college who has produced such an amazing resource. So Emily, thank you for being here with us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your family, and just introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, thank you for having me on, Kyle. And I remember those college years fondly, getting to spend time with you and your now wife when you guys were dating. And I am married to my husband, Brent, and we live in North Carolina. We have 4 children. My oldest is 11, and his name is Micah. Then I have a 9-year-old named Avia, and a 6-year-old named Malachi, and a 4-year-old named Alea. I homeschool all of them, and so we have a very busy life here, and they all take music lessons, so they're kind of following in their mama's musical footsteps. And so we have violins and piano and cello and organ and singing, and so we're a very lively household. I'm also a poet, so I love writing poetry, and have a few of my kids have taken off with that as well. So yeah, it's a little bit about me out here.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, it was a lot of fun being in college together. And as you said, Jackie and I kind of starting our relationship there. And I'll publicly give credit to you as one of those who helped to kind of push us together as we were taking classes together and things like that, and going on chorale tours and various things. And so it's fun at this point now, 10, 12 years past, 15 years past now, to see what the Lord is doing through, the various people in our class and from our same circles in college. And this resource, when you first reached out and told me about it, and I was able to look through it, we knew immediately we wanted to feature this as a book of the month. And for those of you who are not familiar with this book, what this is a compilation of stories of people who have gone through various trials and times of suffering and challenges in their life, and how they have turned to Scripture and turned to Christ for comfort and for hope. And it's also, each story is accompanied by songs, by hymns, by poetry. It's really, really beautifully put together. Emily, I wanted to ask, as far as your desire to put a ministry like this together. It's not just a book. You have a website with people submitting continual stories and things like that. What was it that was the drive in your heart behind this project that got you to put it together?
That's a great question, Kyle. This book took me about 3 years, all in all, to put together. And at the time of its creation, I had a newborn. So, with having a baby, that things take a long time to get done. But I had a small company called Gifts of Hope, and I created gifts for grieving people. And that company was actually born out of a desire to serve what is now one of the authors in this book. And it's someone, Kyle, that you and I both went to college with for a time, and her name is Brighton. And she was married, and 6 weeks into her marriage, he was hit by a drunk driver, and he was killed. And it's one of those things. It's like, how do you minister to someone that you've only interacted with through social media for 10 years? How do you step in to their grief? And So that led me to put together a very special gift for her, including sending a bunch of cards from other widows and people in the church to her with that first Christmas after he had passed away, along with a special locket filled with memories of his life, a locket necklace. Anyway, out of that business, I met so many people that were going through unimaginable suffering and things that we all hope we're never going to have to face, but you don't know what the Lord is going to put in your life. And so there is long-term illness, there's cancer, there's the loss of a young child, there's stillbirth, there's a widow and a widower, and the list goes on of the stories that are in here. But people were coming to me and they were sharing with me hurtful things that had been said to them. And the hurtful things were unintentional, but a lot of them were said to them by well-intentioned believers. And it was things like throwing verses out. The Lord has a plan for you. He will not harm you. Those are true, but sometimes not timely. And Psalms tells us that we need to know when to give a timely word. And so as more and more stories came my way, I saw if people could walk in their shoes, if they could walk into those appointments, they could walk home with them after the funeral, there would be a level of empathy that is maybe lacking. In addition to that, at the end of every story, they fill out 5 questions. And one of the most important questions that they answer is what you should not say to someone in a similar circumstance. Oftentimes, we don't know what to say. And so we are fearful of saying the wrong thing. Sometimes we do say the wrong thing. But I have learned in putting this together that one of the worst things we can do is say nothing at all and act as if their suffering is not there, or as a believer, throw a Band-Aid on there and say, well, at least they're with the Lord now. Yes, they are. And that is a comfort, but they're grieving, and it doesn't make them less godly to grieve. They loved deeply and they're going to grieve deeply.
Yeah, that's so good. Finding that balance between saying nothing and saying the right thing at the wrong time and the right thing at the right time is an art. And I think that's something that is deeply lacking in our culture. So a resource like this to help just to train people, to encourage people to think the right way. I think of Job's friends, who saw his tragedy and came and just sat quietly with him for 7 days. And they didn't say a word, but at the right time, they began to speak. And some of their examples show words not to say. And I was actually just looking at one of the stories here from a dear friend, John Martin. When you mentioned that, what should you not say to someone in a similar circumstance is one of the questions. And he said it's natural to want to relate to someone with a similar experience or story, but generally speaking, this is unhelpful. One person's story is not a prescriptive of someone else's, and comparison can lead to false hope or unrealistic expectations. Every situation is unique, and so are God's purposes. And so this is coming from somebody who went through some very deep trials, with miscarriages and difficulty in building a family. And so, for other people just to come up and say, oh, well, I've gone through that. This is what the Lord's going to do in your life. Or, I overcame that this way. Some of those things can be helpful, but so much of it is built on understanding the full background of somebody's experience. And then, having that relational equity to be able to share that in a way that is that this person knows that you're not just throwing out a platitude, that you're coming alongside them with a heart of familial care and brotherly affection. And so, I'm blown away by the things that I've seen in this resource. What were some of the things that were impactful to you? So we have Brighton's story. We have somebody like John and Lisa Martin's story that you said, okay, there's enough here to actually build a full publishable book. And then, as you've done, the book is so beautifully put together with the questions, with the pictures, with the poetry, with the hymns. I guess, just with your background of the the Hope Gifts ministry, and business that you had, putting this together, what were your thoughts of wanting to just bring about a package of something that was comforting and beautiful for those who suffered through these stories?
I really wanted there to be a well-roundedness to this book. I wanted there to be something that everybody could relate to. And the only type of story that we do not have, and it was one of the authors the last couple months as we were going through the publishing, decided not to share her story at this time because she was going through another loss. And so we do not have the loss of a parent, which is something that I want to add to this book in future editions. But we have so many things in here that it gave a well-roundedness to counselors, it gave a well-roundedness for pastors, or for those of us that are going to walk alongside people, or those of us that are going to walk through it. And most of us, we're going to walk through something hard in our lives. And that's part of how the Lord refines us. But what I wanted it to be a resource that did three things. I wanted it to be authentic. I asked all of the writers, I said, I want you to be very open about your grief and very real about that, not feeling like they needed to over-spiritualize their suffering. Because if people could read the authenticity of their grief, they would see the authenticity of their hope that went with it as well. And so for unbelievers, I wanted them to see that, yes, these people, they grieve too. And when they lose a child, that doesn't hurt less because they're a believer. It still hurts. It's still the loss of a child. But their hope is entirely different. And their hope comes from Christ. So that was the first hope for this book. The second was that people that are going through these dark valleys would see that they're not alone. First of all, that they not only have Christ who has promised to never leave us or forsake us, but that there are other believers who have walked through this and that they survived, and that they not only survived, but the Lord redeemed their suffering, and that he had a good and righteous purpose. And it doesn't feel like that when you're in the midst of pain. A lot of times it doesn't. So when you can read someone else's story and see that they survived the flames and that they came out reflecting the image of Christ more fully, that's encouraging. The aspects of the book in between, the poetry, I've written all the poetry in here, and the scriptures and the printed hymns in here, those are for the heavy heart. Those are for people that maybe they're in the hospital, maybe they just lost a child or just lost a spouse, and some of these stories are just too heavy for them to read. But the content in between is not. That's supposed to be a balm and a soothing aroma to their hurting hearts. And then third, with all of the advice that is given at the end of each chapter by the individual authors, that is meant to equip and strengthen the church. And, scripture tells us that the world will know that we belong to Christ by our love for one another. And so if we can strengthen that aspect of the church and really feel like, okay, I am now emboldened to go and step into their grief with them. And one of the authors in here, she's a dear friend of mine, and she talks about how sometimes we need to just go sit in the ashes with people who are grieving. And when they're ready, give them a hand up and walk alongside them. But as believers, we need to be able and equipped to walk alongside them and not just say, hey, I'll be praying for you, and leave it there. It is great to pray for people and actually pray for them when you say that. But there are tangible things we can do as well. Or even just telling them, I'm going to be praying these things for you. I'm going to be praying these scriptures over you as you walk this path. Having these and being able to say, these are the scriptures I'm going to send them. That I'm going to write them a note and I'm going to include the lyrics to this hymn because this writer who lost their husband said it was helpful to them. So those were the three most important things that were laid on my heart as I was compiling this book.
Well, those are three very good things. And, I often, as I'm coming alongside people in counseling, people who are hesitant to share or people who are even hesitant to come in and have a meeting, I like to share Galatians 6:2, that as Christians, we are called to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And I want people to understand that it's not a burden for you to share your burdens with me. that it is a blessing beyond compare. And in fact, I am actually doing exactly what the Lord has called me to do in doing so. And it's kind of like stage fright. Once you overcome stage fright, being up on stage and singing or talking in front of people is not a big deal. I think people are afraid to bear each other's burdens. They're afraid to get emotionally raw or get too close because there's a comfort level people want to maintain in their own world of non-grief. If that makes sense. And so once you get used to that and coming alongside people in their grief and realizing that, what they're experiencing is real, even though you are not experiencing it, imagining yourself experiencing it, coming alongside them, as you said, praying for them in a timely manner, giving them words of comfort and words of wisdom, just loving on them, and thinking about them in terms of biblical love, which would be the equivalent of kind of two factors. One is self-sacrificing, agape love. So I'm going to do this for the good of somebody else, not for my own gain. And the other is familial love, that it's the same type of care and affection that I would give to a brother or sister or mom or dad or family member. And so when we combine those two things together, a lot of the advice and counsel that you're giving, that the authors are giving from the answers to those questions is going to be helpful in thinking, how can I come alongside these people in their grief and not impose upon them what I want for them, or, just give them a quick word of I'm praying, like you said, I'm praying for you. And then you feel better and walk away into your own comfort, but you're actually coming alongside, bearing their burdens and walking with them. And so I think the examples are really, really clear. It's kind of impressive to see on the cover here, foreword by Joni Eareckson Tada. I grew up knowing her story. She's kind of this archetypal figure of difficulty and trial and grief in life, who has overcome it to the point where she is such an incredible inspiration for joy and for walking in the Lord in whatever circumstance that you find yourself in. How did you come into either contact with her? How did you have a relationship with her? And what was her process in thinking about writing the foreword for this book?
So she has actually been a dear friend of my grandparents for a long time. My grandmother has had MS since she was pregnant with my mother. And my grandparents loved the Lord with all their heart. And my grandfather as well, he had a brain tumor when my mom was about a year old. And so they've walked hard paths, and my grandmother has really had to work for mobility in her life. And she has a heart for those that are suffering. And so she and Joni just kind of became quick friends a long, long time ago. And so when I was writing this book, that was one of my prayers, that Joni would be willing to write the foreword of this book. And she had actually personally purchased a few of the gifts when I had my company. And so I had a chance to interact with her a little bit through that process, because they were all custom gifts. And so when I approached her on this, you never know, that she's so busy that you just don't know if she's going to have the time to do something like that. And what a blessing that she not only wrote a foreword, but she wrote a fairly lengthy foreword, really talking about her suffering and how people came alongside her and how she was ministered to in her suffering, and how that went on to cause her to have a heart to minister to others. And, with her creating Joni and Friends and all that she's accomplished through that ministry, she was just the perfect person to write the foreword. So that was a huge blessing.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I've had the privilege of knowing your grandparents for north of 30 years at this point. And not to sound snotty at all, but as a 16-year-old coming into Grace Community Church, they were old then. And I can't believe the Lord still got them around, and they're charter members of Grace Community Church. Your grandpa helped build that worship center there in Sun Valley. They are just an absolute gift to that church body. And I was there at Shepherd's Conference just a few months ago, and I saw both of them still there. Your grandmother just still beaming with joy and encouraging people, her arms always grabbing other people's arms and pulling them in and praying with them and loving on them. And so, it seems like the perfect family for you to have grown up with in order to have the heart to create a resource like this. So beyond the book, this ministry is not simply just the book, right? You have a website and a blog with continual stories coming in. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I wanted to say really quickly too that the book is actually dedicated to my grandparents. My grandmother has been the one that I went to in many situations and said, I call her More. Mm-hmm. And I said, More, my friend, she just lost her 4-year-old child. I don't know what to say. What do I say to her? And my grandmother is the one who wisely said to me, always say his name. Always talk about the memories you had of him. When you interact with her, if something sparks your memory of him, say it. Say his name. And that, we don't think that. We think, oh man, we don't want to say their name because that might bring up hurt feelings and sad feelings. And they're thinking about them all the time. They want to know that other people are thinking of them and remembering them as well. And so my grandmother has been such a wealth of wisdom for me. And so that is why they had this book dedicated to them. But yes, we do have a website, and there's a feature on there called Submit Your Story. And the readers of the book can go on there and submit their own story of suffering and the hope that they found in Christ. And by God's grace, we have had many people write in and submit their stories, and people from all different walks of life, all different kinds of trials. Right now, we have a man featured on there who discusses his struggle with singleness and cancer and going through those simultaneously. He's a deacon at his church, and his greatest desire is to be married, and instead he finds himself walking through the hard journey of cancer on his own. But we also have all of the hymns that you can find in the book. They have been recorded and they're on there. And that's something that we offer for free for people to listen to. And that is meant to be used as a tool of encouragement as well. So whether you need to listen to one of those hymns because you're having a hard day, or maybe you've got a loved one in the hospital, you can play those hymns for them. And the hymns, as I'm sure you know, Kyle, with the music we grew up, singing, and they're so rich in theology. And so it can take our minds off of our current situation and place us with a heavenly mindset, which is where our minds ought to be. That's the only thing that can give us a hope, is that Jesus has overcome the world, that we have all these struggles and sorrows in this world, but that this is not our home and this is not the end. This is not all that we have. Christ has redeemed all of that for us. And so we have that. You can go on there and see other interviews that I've done in the past. You can purchase the book. You can purchase downloads of the poetry, so all of the poems in the book. And the reason I did that is because a lot of times when you have a loved one that is going through a hard time and you want to write them a card, you don't know what to say. And so the poetry is meant to kind of take the place of that you can write this poem that meets them where they're at. And you can write on there, I'm praying for you, and this is the verse I'm going to be praying for you. And send that off. And you can be confident that that poem is going to encourage them, but also make them feel seen in their sorrow. So those are some of the most important things that we have on the website. And I definitely would encourage people to come visit and submit their own story as well.
Oh, that's great. And, I think back to King David and the fact that David was a musician, he was a poet, and he was also a deeply emotional human being. I think in our circles, oftentimes at church and reform circles, emotion is suppressed to a level that is unhealthy, and we want to obviously be ruled by truth and not be ruled by our emotions. But what I often see King David doing in the Psalms is expressing his heart of joy or gratitude or grief or suffering or whatever his circumstance is. And quite often, if he's angry or if he's frustrated or if he's overwhelmed with sorrow, he pours out his heart to the Lord. And there's a catharsis, I think, that happens because he's allowed to process the emotion that always brings him back to a foundation of, but I know what's true about God. And I'm going to speak the truth about God to myself, and then that's going to result in praise. And it always results in a kind of a doxology. And so he's processing his emotional grief using truth that results in praise. And it's, I was actually going to ask you about the hymns because they're beautiful to look at. And for those of us who can, read music, or at least sort of read music, we can kind of figure out the songs. But it's so great to be able to go onto the website and listen to them, to have them recorded and hear them and to share them with people. I remember, 25 years ago, you'd have to put a CD on the back of the book. And now it's nice. You can just go to the website and download those or listen to those. And so when it comes to the poetry, would it be too much for me to ask or put you on the spot to give us a sample of the poetry that you have and kind of read it as the author in the voice that you would have people listen?
Sure. So this one is called Cite. Stammering in blackest night, bruised, distraught, and frightened, searching in the darkness for my eyes to be enlightened. With trembling voice and weary knees, I call to Adonai, and in my spirit deeply long for faith to become sight. El Roy, the God who sees all things, who knows my every pondering, has sought me in the valley and shepherds me from wandering. He binds my heart up tight to his, Elkanah is his name. He jealously protects me and guards me as his claim. Jehovah, my God, my rescuer, guide me as to light, till grief gives way to glory and faith gives way to sight.
Wow, that reminds me so much of the Puritan collection, The Valley of Vision, which is these amazing collection of prayers that are written in such a poetic manner that express theological truth with beauty and with human language that can mingle in, exactly what the author is feeling, but also exactly what they're hoping in. And I like to remind people that a biblical hope is not simply like, oh, I hope something happens nice for me, but that it's a knowledge of a fixed future reality. It's a knowledge of God's absolute sovereign and good plan for our lives. And so no matter what is happening, our hope is that God's end goal for us is going to be his perfect, good and glorifying purpose for us. So I love to hear that poetry. As we are featuring this book at Redeemer Bible Church this month, we want to encourage you as readers to understand that if you're going through grief, if you're going through difficult circumstances, that you're not alone, that many people have also gone through similar things. And as we are called to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, a resource like this is going to be very good for you as a soothing balm for your own soul, but then also, as Emily has shared with us, as a way for you to be instructed on how to come alongside others who are going through that grief. Emily, as we kind of wrap things up here, what would be some of your encouragements for those who are standing at our bookstore looking for their next purchase and they see this as our book of the month, for taking this book home with them?
I would say that this is a book that will stand the test of time, that there's always going to be a need for the resources you find in here. And at the end of the book, we also give a whole 2-page spread of ways that you can serve, whether it is acts of service or tangible gifts you can do, or here's music you can give, or here's book suggestions. Those can all be found at the end of the book as well. There's also, in the very back of the book, there is a gospel presentation. Alistair Begg wrote that for us. And that is so that if you have a friend who is an unbeliever, you can show them the hope of Christ with this book. If you have a friend who's a believer, you can anchor them in the hope that they already have in Christ through this book. If you want to be more prepared, and we all should be, this is for you. This is for you to equip yourself and to be able to be the hands and feet of Christ and to truly love the way that Christ loves, which is taking us out of our comfort zone and loving people where they are, and understanding that we need to be prepared with a timely word so that we can uplift and encourage one another.
Now, you look like you're sitting there in a pretty nice house. You must be making millions off of the sales of this book, right? so I had seen that you are using the resources and the income from this book to reinvest into the ministry. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So going into this, one of the first things I wanted to make very clear to the authors as I approached them is that I am not looking to profit off of your suffering. I'm not looking to gain anything. This is something that I truly feel is needed in the church and that it's going to benefit the church. And so all of the authors and I wrote up a contract with one another saying that at no point in the life of Hope in the Mourning will we take a dime from these book sales, that everything that comes in goes directly back into the book. And the Lord has been so faithful and just beyond blessing us abundantly to where I've been able to pay off all of the debt from this book in the first 6 months of its sales. And so we've been able to now, we're giving books to widows, and we've been giving books to bereaved parents, and we've been able to send checks to families going through cancer and newly widowed mothers and mothers who have been abandoned, and things that help us kind of like put our money where our mouth is per se, like really dive in to those that are suffering and help them however we can. And so that is the heart behind this. It's 100% of the profits go straight into grief ministry.
Well, I love to hear that. And I know that our church family would love to hear that as well. Because as we have a very, very generous church family here by God's grace. They partner with us in ministry, and for them to be able to not only be able to get a resource that equips them really, really well and that encourages their heart and shows them a little bit of glimpse into other people's life and suffering and ways that God is growing them and challenging them and blessing them, but also knowing that the dollars that they're giving are going to go to serve and bless other people as well. So I love that, and I'm thankful to the Lord that He's provided that those means and this ministry for you to be able to do this. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be again featuring this book at our church in our bookstore as our book of the month, Redeemer Family. If you're looking at this, pick one up and take it home. I think it's going to be wonderful. Emily, it's great to catch up with you. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any parting words for our audience, you can give them.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And my parting words would just be that I hope that each of you, as you pour over this resource, that you will find the hope that we have in Christ, regardless of our circumstances, that He is the anchor in every storm we're going to go through.
Amen. Couldn't have said it better. From the author, from the compiler of Hope in the Mourning, a hope-filled guide through grief, Emily Curtis, thank you for being our guest today. If you liked this episode and you want to hear more content from Redeeming Truth Podcast, you can go ahead and hit subscribe down below on this video. And we'll put a link for this book and to the website in the description of this podcast as well. And we look forward to seeing you next time on the Redeeming Truth Podcast.
Hey, don't leave yet. If you're part of the 75% of people that watch our content but haven't subscribed, this is your time. Go down and find that little subscribe button and click it. That way you will know every time we come out with more content here from Redeemer Bible Church. Also, if you would like to give to this ministry, this is the only way that this ministry can happen. Make sure to click the link down below to the give button and you can give to the ministry here at Redeemer. And then finally, if you want to know more about what's going on, check out this podcast right here.